Think about your own life for a moment. Think about the people who doubted you, the ones who underestimated you, the co-worker who talked behind your back, the family member who never believed in your choices, the person who openly disrespected you and walked away untouched. Now ask yourself, what would it mean to earn their respect? Not by defeating them, not by proving them wrong loudly, but simply by becoming someone whose character they could no longer ignore. That question is what this video is about. Today, we are going to walk through 7 layers of understanding, 7 ways of being that, when lived honestly, will shift something, not just in how others see you, but in how you see yourself. And that shift, as we will discover, is where everything begins. Let us start at the very bottom. Before confidence, before strategy, before any technique or approach, before any of the steps that follow, there is one question that runs underneath all of them. Are you the same person when no one is watching? That is integrity, not a concept, not a word on a motivational poster. It is the gap, or the absence of a gap, between who you claim to be and how you actually live. And people feel it. They always feel it, even when they cannot name it, even when they have no evidence. They sense when someone is performing versus when someone simply is. This is where most of us get respect wrong. We think respect is about reputation, about what people say when your name comes up. But reputation is a shadow. What casts the shadow is character. And character is built in the moments no one is applauding. Winston Churchill understood this deeply. During the darkest years of the Second World War, when London was being bombed and half of Europe had already surrendered, Churchill refused to negotiate with Hitler. Not once, not quietly behind closed doors, not when the pressure became almost unbearable. His enemies called him reckless. His allies questioned him. But he held his position, not because he was powerful, but because he had already decided who he was. And eventually, even those who opposed him could not deny the steadfastness of that character. The philosopher Aristotle wrote something that still holds true thousands of years later. He said that dignity does not come from being honored. It comes from deserving to be honored. That is a subtle but enormous distinction. It means that respect is not something you pursue directly. It is something that accumulates around you as a result of how you live. You do not chase it. You build the kind of person it naturally attaches itself to. Now, think about your enemies for a moment. The people in your life who disrespect you, who challenge you, who see you in the worst possible light. What is one area where you are not fully honest with them or with yourself? Not comfortable to sit with, is it? But here is the uncomfortable truth. Your enemies often see your inconsistencies before your friends do. Friends protect you from the mirror. Enemies hold it up. And that is precisely why integrity matters most in adversarial situations. Because when you are consistent, when you keep your word, even in difficult moments, when you admit mistakes without being forced, your enemy loses their most powerful weapon against you. They can no longer say you are a fraud, and something shifts in them. Slowly, without announcement, the hostility softens into something more like reluctant acknowledgement. Integrity does not make enemies disappear, but it transforms the nature of the conflict. It moves it from personal to principled. And principled opposition, over time, can become principled respect. Now, something important appears here. Once integrity is your foundation, confidence becomes possible in a way it never was before. But this is where many people take a wrong turn. Because there are 2 very different things that look similar from the outside but feel completely different to everyone around you. There is real confidence, and there is performed confidence. Real confidence is quiet. It does not need the room to know it is there. It does not interrupt. It does not diminish others to feel tall. It simply exists, grounded, still, present. It says, without words, I know who I am, and I do not need you to confirm it. Performed confidence is the opposite. It is loud because it is scared. It dominates conversations because silence feels dangerous. It dismisses other people's ideas because other people's ideas feel threatening. And the cruel irony is that performed confidence is the thing people most often mistake for arrogance. Because it is arrogance. Arrogance is simply insecurity wearing a mask. Muhammad Ali is often quoted for his famous declarations. And on the surface, that sounds like pure arrogance. But watch what Ali actually did. He trained when no one was watching. He studied opponents meticulously. He was never complacent before a fight. No matter how inferior he believed the opponent to be, his words were bold, yes, but they were backed by an extraordinary work ethic that was invisible to most people. He earned his confidence every single day in a gym before 6 a.m. And his opponents, many of whom disliked him, some of whom despised him, respected him, because at some point, you cannot argue with excellence. At some point, the quality of someone's work speaks so clearly that your personal feelings about them become irrelevant. This is what real confidence does in the presence of your enemies. It confuses them at first. They expect you to react defensively. They expect you to compete with them, to try to one-up them, to let their opinion of you affect you visibly. And when you don't, when you simply continue being yourself without apology and without performance, they are left with nothing to push against. Because here is what enemies are actually looking for. They want a reaction. They want to see that they have power over your emotional state. Real confidence quietly removes that power, not through aggression, through stillness. Now we go deeper. Because here is something that will sound strange at first. Most of the time, your enemies do not actually hate you. They hate a version of you, a story they have constructed from incomplete information, from past experiences that have nothing to do with you, from wounds that existed long before you arrived. Think about the last conflict you had with someone who seemed unreasonable. Was it really about the thing you were arguing about? Or was it about something older, something unspoken, something neither of you fully understood? Abraham Lincoln once said that the best way to destroy an enemy is to make him a friend. But that process does not begin with strategy. It begins with listening. During the final years of the Civil War, Lincoln's approach to the southern states was not punitive. While many in his government wanted harsh retribution, Lincoln spoke of malice toward none and charity for all. He tried to understand, not excuse, but understand the psychology of the people on the other side. And that understanding was not weakness. It was the most sophisticated form of strength available to him. When you genuinely listen to someone who opposes you, not waiting for your turn to speak, not building your counter-argument in your head while they talk, but actually hearing them, something unexpected happens. They feel it. And people who feel heard become less defensive. People who become less defensive sometimes reveal the real reason they have been hostile. And the real reason is almost never what the surface conflict suggests. Ask yourself honestly, when did you last try to understand what your enemy is actually afraid of? Not what they say they want, what they are afraid of. Because beneath most hostility, there is fear. Fear of being overlooked, fear of being wrong, fear of being seen as less. And fear, when it is met with empathy instead of more aggression, begins to quiet down. This does not mean you agree with them. It does not mean you surrender your position. It means you are secure. Enough in yourself to hear someone else's reality without it threatening yours. And that kind of security, that spaciousness, is deeply, deeply rare. It is the kind of thing people notice without knowing why. It is the kind of thing that earns respect from people who are certain they disliked you. This is where things become deeper. Because calmness is not a mood. It is not something you feel when things are going well. Anyone can be calm when there is nothing to be calm about. Real calmness, the kind that earns respect, is what you maintain when everything around you is designed to make you lose control. And your enemies know this, whether consciously or not. The moment they sense you are reactive, they have found your lever. They will pull it again and again, not necessarily out of malice, sometimes simply because it works. The Dalai Lama has lived in exile for over 6 decades. The country of his birth, the culture he represents, the people he loves, systematically suppressed by a government that has done everything in its power to erase what he stands for. By any measure, he has every justification for bitterness, for anger, for despair. And yet what the world watches in him is not bitterness. It is a kind of unshakable, almost inexplicable peace. And here is what that peace communicates. Not that he doesn't care, but that his sense of self cannot be destabilized from the outside, that no external force, not oppression, not loss, not humiliation, can reach the place inside him where he actually lives. That is what calmness signals to your enemies. Not passivity, not surrender, but an inner architecture they cannot access. And that is terrifying to someone who wants to reduce you. When you respond to provocation with logic instead of emotion, You force the other person to meet you on a different level. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer about winning and losing. It is about ideas, and on that ground, the person with integrity and clarity will almost always prevail. Your breath is a tool. Seriously, slow it down. In the middle of confrontation, when your heart is racing and your words want to come out sharp and hard, slow your breath. It sends a direct signal to your nervous system that you are safe. And from safety comes clarity. From clarity comes the kind of response that people remember long after the argument ends. Now, something important appears again, because there is a version of calm, of listening, of empathy, that slides, without you noticing, into something else. Something that is not respect at all. It is appeasement. And appeasement, dressed up as patience, is still a form of self-abandonment. And people feel that too. The people who earn respect, even from enemies, are not the people who tolerate everything quietly. They are the people who say clearly and calmly and without drama, "This is not acceptable to me." Oprah Winfrey grew up in conditions that might have taught her that her voice did not matter, that the opinions of powerful, critical people defined her worth. For years, she navigated an industry that tried to reshape her size, her hair, her manner of speaking, her ambition. And the moment that changed everything for her was not the moment she became famous. It was the moment she decided that certain things were simply not available to the people in her life. Not with anger, not with ultimatums. Just quietly, firmly, with full conviction. A boundary is not a wall. It is not hostility. It is a statement about what you value. And when you set boundaries calmly, when you say, "I will not accept this kind of treatment," without raising your voice, without collapsing into justification, you communicate something that goes beyond the specific situation. You communicate that you know your own worth, that you are not negotiable on the things that matter. And here is the strange thing about enemies and boundaries. People who push against you, who test you, who provoke you, who challenge you, are often unconsciously doing so to find out where you stand. They want to know if you have edges, because a person with no edges, a person who bends to every pressure, is not someone you respect. They are someone you eventually dismiss. Set your limits. Speak them plainly. Hold them without drama. Watch how the dynamic shifts. Here is where most people stop. They build integrity, confidence, empathy, calmness, and boundaries, and they believe that is enough. And those things are remarkable. But there is one more layer that almost no one reaches, and it is the most disarming thing a human being can do in the face of hostility. Help your enemy, not as manipulation, not as a strategy to make them feel obligated, but genuinely provide value to someone who did not expect it from you. Steve Jobs had a fascinating relationship with his rivals. He was known for being difficult, demanding, sometimes brutally critical, but he was also known for something else, an almost obsessive desire to learn. From competitors, from critics, from industries entirely unrelated to his own. He studied rivals not to defeat them, but to understand what they understood, and in doing so, he often ended up creating products that incorporated the best thinking from people who considered themselves his opposition. That mutual learning, that hidden generosity of attention, built a form of respect in the tech world that outlasted any individual conflict. Think about what it would mean to offer something genuinely useful to a person who expects nothing from you except more conflict. They come armed for a battle, and you hand them something that helps them. That moment creates a cognitive disruption they cannot easily resolve, because their entire story about you, the story that justifies their hostility, requires you to be selfish, threatened, and small. When you act generously, that story breaks down, and something new has to form in its place. This is not naive. It does not mean you expose yourself to people who will take advantage. It means that when the opportunity exists to give something, knowledge, a kind word, a fair acknowledgement of their work, you choose generosity over pride, not because you are weak, because you understand something about the long arc of human relationships that most people miss. Generosity is power, the quiet, unhurried kind, the kind that accumulates over years, the kind that enemies eventually find impossible to argue with. And now we reach the deepest layer. Everything we have discussed so far has been about who you are, how you carry yourself, how you respond, how you treat others. But there is a final shift in perspective that changes everything, and it is uncomfortable enough that most people refuse to make it. Your enemies are your most honest teachers, not your kindest, not your most patient, but your most honest. Because an enemy who criticizes you is not trying to protect your feelings. They have no investment in your comfort. And that means when they identify a weakness in you, a blind spot, a failure, they are telling you something that your friends have probably known for years but were too careful to say. Michael Jordan was not naturally the greatest basketball player of his generation. In his early career, he was an extraordinary individual talent, playing on a team that kept losing to the Detroit Pistons, a physical, defensive, brutally effective team that seemed specifically designed to stop him. The Pistons did not like Jordan. They targeted him deliberately, hit him hard, and found every weakness in his game. And for years, they beat him. And then Jordan changed. Not just his training, but his relationship to losing. He studied those losses. He studied those opponents. He allowed their challenges to reshape his understanding of the game, of teamwork, of his own limitations. And when he eventually overcame them, when he won 6 championships, the Pistons, for all their hostility, had been essential to building the player he became. Friedrich Nietzsche, in one of his most piercing observations, wrote, "We should also respect the enemy in our friend." What he meant was that real growth does not come from the people who comfort us. It comes from the friction, the opposition, the challenge that forces us to become more than we currently are. Our enemies, the ones who push back, who refuse to applaud, who expose our weaknesses, are doing something our friends often cannot bring themselves to do. The question is not whether you have enemies. You do. We all do. The question is whether you are using them, whether you are extracting from every conflict the information it contains about where you can grow, whether you are treating opposition as an obstacle or as a curriculum. And here is the final psychological revelation, the one that ties all of this together. Respect from an enemy is not really about the enemy at all. It is about becoming someone who cannot be denied. It is about building, quietly and consistently, a version of yourself that is so clearly real, so clearly grounded, so clearly committed to something true, that even the people who want to dismiss you find that they cannot. That is the deepest kind of respect, not applause, not approval, but the quiet, reluctant acknowledgement that says, "I see you. I cannot pretend otherwise." Let us bring all of this together. We began with a man in a prison cell, a man who had every reason to come out of that cell looking for revenge. But Mandela understood something about the architecture of respect that took him 27 years to build and a lifetime to live. He understood that the kind of person you are, consistently, over time, in the face of everything, that is what earns you a place in the minds of even your harshest critics. Integrity is the foundation, not the impression of integrity, the real thing, the same person in the dark as in the light. Confidence that does not need to shrink anyone to stand tall. Empathy that listens not to respond, but to genuinely understand the human being in front of you, even when that human being has chosen to be your adversary. Calmness that signals an inner life no external force can reach. Boundaries that say, quietly and firmly, "This is who I am and what I stand for." Generosity that surprises and disarms the people who expected nothing from you, but more conflict, and the willingness, the rare, courageous willingness, to learn from the people who challenge you most. These are not separate techniques. They are aspects of the same thing. They are all expressions of a person who has chosen, again and again, to be real, to be honest, to be genuinely themselves, without apology and without performance. And here is the thing about living that way. You stop needing people's respect. Not because it stops mattering, it still matters, deeply, to be seen and valued, but because you have built something inside yourself that does not collapse when it is withheld. You become, in the truest sense, someone who earns respect precisely because they have stopped chasing it. Your enemies will feel that. Some of them will never say it out loud. Some of them will keep the hostility in place because they need it. But somewhere in them, in the quiet of their own honest moments, they will know. They will see it, and they will not be able to argue with what they see. Start today, not with a grand gesture, not with a confrontation, with one honest choice, in one small moment that is fully aligned with who you actually want to be. that is where everything begins. If something in this video reached you, if it gave you a new way of looking at the conflicts in your life, consider sharing it with someone who needs it. And I would genuinely love to hear from you in the comments. Has there ever been a moment when you earned respect from someone who had every reason to dismiss you? What happened? What changed? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. And if you want to keep going deeper, subscribe. There is much more to explore.